Thank you very much, Kadri, and thank you especially for inviting me again here to speak. So it's always been a pleasure. I hope it's also today. I'm going to talk about the role of the sustainability in the corporate value chain reconfiguration. And before going into the topic, then would like to briefly give a background about the company. So then you understand what we are doing and maybe give some context also why the supply chain, why the sustainability is so important for us as a company. So GPV Group, it's the second largest manufacturer of electronics products, let's say, in Europe, in the field of industrial electronics. We do also some medical products. We do also some high-tech consumer products, but the focus has always been on the industrial products. You can see some of the pictures of the products what we are making. And being an EMS company, it means that it's not our products, but a company who has designed the products. They can come to us. We can, in many cases, help them to design these products together. And then we manufacture them. We provide also repair services, after-sales services after the products are coming to the end of their life. We have roughly 7,500 employees. It's 13 countries all over the world. And its size of the company, it's roughly 1 billion euro, what we are doing this year. And it will be growing in the coming years quite rapidly. We have one factory in Estonia, so it's located very close here in Elva, around 20 kilometers from Tartu. We have here 900 employees, so I think we are the largest single location. Let's say there are some other companies who have multiple locations who are also big, but we are the largest, which is in the single site. And what might be interesting is that there has been a lot of news about, let's say, companies reducing the people because, let's say, certain economic downturn or challenges in the market. We have been actually adding, so we have been benefiting from this increased labor availability. So just in the last 2 months, we have been adding around 150 people to work in our Elva site, and we continue adding the people also in the coming years. There is a picture of the factory we have in Elva. If you see, it actually says Enix, and the reason is that it's now 5 weeks ago where 2 companies merged, so Enix and GPV Group merged, and we are now using the brand name GPV Group for the new company. Supply chain. So here are actually 2 pictures of the world map, and it shows the complexity of the supply chain in this kind of. So it's a one factory picture. Like I said, we have 19 factories, but then the graph would have looked even more this kind of fuzzy. So it's only one factory supply chain picture. And you can see that one factory buys 21,000 different components. And in total, if we count all the components that are coming in, it's roughly 1 billion pieces every year. So if you count it to seconds, it means that every second, like 30 components are coming in. But it also means that every second, these 30 components are assembled into the products. And they are coming from roughly 55 countries, some years more, some years less. And then out of these 1 billion components, we are making actually 5 million products every year. So different products is roughly 6,000, and they are delivered to 69 different countries. So basically everywhere, I think there are all continents we are shipping the products. So it's rather complex, and this kind of topics of what was discussed also before, resilience of the supply chains, this kind of sustainability topics, these are really critical for us to manage. So to understand a bit more the supply chain situation, I'd like to have a very simple this kind of picture that usually all human decisions are driven by this kind of fear and the greed. So sometimes we see that there is a profit motive, let's say, or we can make money. So we are getting greedy, and in some cases we see that there are certain risks, and we are afraid something negative will happen, and then we are changing maybe our previous decision. And if you look at the past, let's say 20, 30 years, what has happened in the supply chains, there has been very much driven by the greed. So, and it's a push, of course. You are in a competition, so you have to find the best place where to manufacture, the best supply chain setup. And very often, let's say, what it meant in the last 30 years was moving the production, let's say, from the US, from the Western Europe, to both to Eastern Europe countries, but also to Asia, especially in China. So it was very much driven by this need. to find the cost savings, and that was one of the ways to achieve it. Kadri mentioned I was working actually 5 years in China, and I was there between 2009 and 2013. And at that time, I really saw how the global corporations, they had the targets that certain percentage of their sourcing has to be done from the so-called low-cost countries. So even if they were very happy with their factory, let's say in Germany or in Sweden, that was a corporate strategy, which was to move this production to, let's say, to Asia, and they had to implement that strategy. So it was driven partially by the greed, but it was also a strategy that everybody in the world followed. Now, what started to happen is this kind of events which showed that it's not all about profitability, let's say, and let's say making profits by doing this. Certain risks started to emerge, and I would like to maybe point out a couple of them what have happened. So one case what impacted a lot in electronics industry was the Fukushima accident back in 2011. And maybe it wasn't felt, let's say, in Europe or America so much. It felt a bit like a local. Of course, we have some implications also in Europe now, where countries decided to exit, let's say, some nuclear power generation. But what happened in electronics industry, it turned out that some really critical chemicals were actually produced in the vicinity of this location. So it was really a risk that all electronic supply chains are stopping because you couldn't get this one critical chemical which was produced there. So one example of the risk, and everybody was really fearful about this. 2015, of course, this has been discussed and talked much earlier, but we started getting these global climate targets, a reduction of the CO2, reduction of different greenhouse gases, and companies started to pay much more attention to how they operate their supply chains. Then getting faster, 2017, when Donald Trump became US president, one of the things he started was really, or let's say there was some friction before, but he was really coming out with this trade war with China. Then when we move forward, 2019, there was a massive disruption for the supply chains where COVID-19 came first in China, but it was spreading around the world. A lot of factories were shut down because they were not able to operate. We got a lot of shortages of certain products. There was a demand going up for additional products. So it was a massive disruption. So 2 years later. Then maybe moving again 2 years later, we had the ship accident in the Suez Canal. So there was one ship that blocked the whole channel there. And basically for one week, nothing was able to go through there. And it again caused a lot of fear that when you produce, let's say, in China, but you need on-time products in Europe, how do you get it when these kind of things are happening and nothing moves? Moving one more year, 2022, war in Ukraine. Again, people didn't expect it. Some supply chains are massively disrupted. I think Slava was talking about the food security, but there are also certain metals which are produced, let's say, in Ukraine. Then the sanctions what are applied, so it causes a massive disruption to the supply chain, and supply chains don't work. Then part of this also in 2022, we have seen, of course, the energy prices going up, but also the currency prices are going up. So if you are buying goods in US dollars and you're selling them in euros, you are taking a massive loss actually this year because the US dollar is getting so much stronger and adds cost to the companies. So what can we learn from this couple of things what have happened in the last, let's say, 10 years? I put here one quote, and I think there have been many people saying the same thing. I put the quote which was then attributed to Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, saying the pace of change has never been this fast, yet it will never be this slow again. So when we are somehow feeling that the world is getting faster and faster, and we think that can it get even worse, also from the supply chain, we talk a lot about this. Well, yeah, you can see how more frequent these kind of events and disruptions are happening. So it's obvious that the companies there are a lot of smart people working, and they have to keep the supply chains running. So obviously, the strategy of the company has to reflect this kind of changing world. So that's why where we get also this sustainability picture. So sustainability, a lot of people think about it as something like an environmental part, that, okay, we have to save the climate, save the planet. It's an environmental aspect. So a lot of people think about the sustainability. But actually, there are two more factors. One is the social factor. So, in a simplified way, you have to make sure that the people in a country, that they have the job, they have the work, they can support their families. So if you move all the manufacturing to another region or to another country, there is a high risk that there is this social unrest. And that is, of course, not good for building this kind of sustainable future. And there is also the economic impact. So it doesn't make sense if you get the best price, let's say, for something, and it doesn't arrive. So, it's many aspects. So again, always this fear and greed, and you have to find the balance. And what I would like to say with these examples from the past 10 years is that the balance has clearly moved from this greed, meaning that we need to make a profit at all, trying to find a way to make the best profit, to realizing that, hey, if the parts are not present, and as you can see in the example of GPV, we need 30 parts every single second. If one of them is not coming, well, our production stops, and there is nothing we can do. So this kind of sustainability is much broader for the companies, and they have to take it very seriously. So what sustainability means to global corporations? Here are some of the statements. So the first statement is from the Nestle. That's a Swiss company. Challenge posed by climate change is serious and growing. Nestle is working hard to reduce its carbon footprint and achieve net zero by 2015 at the latest. So having a very clear target there. Another example from the elevator company, Kone. We offer carbon neutral products and carbon neutral maintenance. So companies are coming to the market. The below quote is actually from Schneider Electric. So it says that the sustainability is the core of our purpose, culture, and business as we accelerate our contributions to a sustainable and inclusive world. So as I mentioned, that 30 years ago, companies made a clear strategic choice to move production, let's say, from one region to the other. And now you can see that they have made very clear strategic goals to put sustainability as the core of how they do business. And I gave here one practical example, which might be interesting, that this chart here shows where the electricity is generated. So you can see that, for example, in the world, totally 62% of electricity is generated by the fossil fuels, and then there is a nuclear, which is CO2, let's say, neutral, and renewables. If you look at Estonia, we are very much world average, so 62. If you look at our neighbors, Latvia, let's say 38%, Finland only 15%, and Sweden is so small that it's not even pointed out in the chart how small it is. What it means if there is a company, let's say, for whom the sustainability is so important, will they move the location, or will they continue producing in China? Would they move production, let's say, to Estonia, or would they go to, let's say, Finland? And if the sustainability is really put as a core for the decision making, then they might not come to Estonia because they have a target to get their carbon footprint, let's say, to net zero. And it means that if you produce your electricity from this kind of fossil fuels, you are not helping these companies to achieve their targets. So these kind of very practical implications are starting to come, and we should never underestimate these things. So what is the conclusion then? That I think it's very much reflects what the previous speaker also said about some things are really overlapping. So these 5 big trends, let's say, what I have seen really coming more and more important in the last 3 years. So global supply chain, it is becoming more and more regional supply chain because companies have realized that the interruption in the supply chain is much more expensive for them than they can ever save by having this kind of long, stretched, risky supply chain, which might be cheaper as a unit cost, but as a whole, it's more expensive. You can see from the previous slide, climate change targets as a base for decision making. So yes, you can offer a good product, a good quality, but if it's not manufactured in a sustainable way, you will not be able to produce it. And it's also the end consumer who is pushing for this one. Transportation costs are increasing. So, it was very cheap to move products between China and US, China and Europe. It because the oil prices are high because of the CO2 taxation and so on. So transportation is becoming more expensive. So it means also that you should be producing closer to the end markets. Salary cost differences are getting smaller. So if you look at some regions, let's say in China, if you look at Estonia, the cost level is not so different. Certain white-collar jobs are already paid much higher in China than they are, for example, in Estonia, in Latvia, in the region where we are mainly competing. So that means that there is really not this kind of labor arbitrage between the countries what you can take advantage of. A lot has been, I have talked about managing the risk versus the cost. And yeah, that's the conclusion then, that the companies, they see that the world is changing and they understand that they will only survive if they manage these risks what are ongoing. And it's also clear that leading companies in the world, they have changed their supply chain strategies as a response to these challenges. Thank you very much for your attention.